So here we go. Welcome to the WIOA Wednesday webinar for today, October 28th. Our
Kristen?
title, yes?
Okay, I can hear you now, but you went off.
Okay. Our title for today, everyone, is Local Impact of COVID-19 Crisis, Strategic and Information Products. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Just a reminder, everyone on this webinar is in listen-only mode. So if you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please feel free to type those in the question box or the chat box. And then a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and the presentation from today as well as the recording will be available on our website, the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support's website, and I will put the link in the chat, and also on the Illinois WorkNet website within 48 hours. Another reminder that tomorrow each attendee will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking about today's webinar. If you could please take 5 minutes out of your time to provide any suggestions you have to help improve upcoming webinars, we would greatly appreciate it. Just another reminder, if you do find yourself having a faulty audio connection or internet connection, please feel free to call in using the Zoom phone number on your initial registration email. And then, George, could you go to the next slide for me, please? And the next slide. So today we had some technical difficulties, not starting off too hot this morning, everyone, but with our polling system. So we're going to do our polls via the chat. So if you could type in the chat where your local area is this morning, we would love to hear where you're joining us from this morning. I see we have some people who are joining us from Chicago. Good morning, everyone. Joliet. From Sangamon. I see you're all putting the number here that's on the map, which is great. Thank you. Springfield, DuPage, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Chicago. Good morning, everyone. Perfect. And if you could go to the next slide, George. And then also if you could just let us know, some of you already did, but if you could let us know which partner you best represent. So I see we have LWA 14, Chicago, LWIA 7. Thank you, welcome. LWIA 1. So Title 1. LWIB 26, welcome. Title 3. Title 1. Business, IDES, DHS. Adult Ed, Title 1. LWI 15, DCEO, OET, Tech and Performance, welcome. Title 3, Veterans, welcome. VR, welcome. Workforce Development Board of Rock Island, welcome. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we appreciate you sticking through us through the first 5 minutes this morning with those technical difficulties that we did have. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter today, George Putnam, and he is going to take us into the webinar. Thank you, George.
Well, thank you very much, Kirsten. As Kirsten mentioned, I work with the Department of Employment Security. I am the Director of Labor Market Information. And today's topic is focused on strategic information products, kind of our labor market information response to the COVID-19 crisis. As was the case with most states, Illinois experienced an unprecedented volume of claims for unemployment insurance. In the first 3 weeks of the COVID crisis, the volume of claims for unemployment insurance exceeded the volume for all of 2019 and in fact all of 2018. We during those initial weeks that we began getting questions from our local partners, trying to understand the breadth and the depth of what was going on in their local economies. So some of the typical kinds of questions that we received were such as, which local labor markets have been hit the hardest by the layoffs, the economic impact, what's the composition of the unemployed, if the local WIOA boards are having to gear up their training programs, is the composition of the unemployed in their local areas different under the COVID than previously? And then finally, what does reemployment look like? And a couple things about that set of questions that I'd like to kind of stress is first, to focus on local. So really the challenge for us, that is the entity responsible for producing of labor market information that is comprehensive of the state, is what information can be made available that gets at the local aspect of the COVID crisis. And the second is, and I think you can see as you look over these questions, the breadth of the impact, wanting to know not just in terms of the industry composition of the unemployed, but the demographic. And we'll be getting to some of that here soon. But also beyond just the composition, the economic impact, again, at the local level. And we'll be talking some about that as well. So in our approach to providing and addressing those concerns and needs expressed by the local, our local partners, we developed a twofold approach. One was to make more relevant some of our current products, and second was to develop a new product. And the current products that we worked on that I'll go over this morning, the first is our monthly in-demand jobs report, and the second is projected employment demand. The new product that I want to present this morning is the unemployment to reemployment portal. Some of you have heard me talk over the past couple months, may have heard parts of the portal, but there have been features that have been added as recently as yesterday that I want to present today. So first, the monthly in-demand jobs report. We provide each month a report on in-demand jobs for each economic development region in the state. The link is provided in the handout that you'll get at the conclusion of this talk. And we've been doing that for a number of years using Help Wanted Online, now produced by the Conference Board, and now they're in partnership with Burning Glass. So this is kind of under the heading of Burning Glass. But typically, the report that is pre-COVID, the report included all jobs, reported by employers and by occupation. What we felt in this COVID period that we needed to focus just on first-time job ads, and our point there, and this is really the the thinking of Tom Austin and Vicki Niederhoff, who are the two leads on this report. Their sense was that really what the local offices and what job seekers needed was really to be looking at and applying for first-time job ads, kind of in the prior 30 days. To weed out of the job postings, kind of the high turnover postings such as fast food managers that are a part of every EDR report just because the turnover is so high in fast food managers. Or postings that had been first posted several months ago, but they had bought space or time to post over a 4-month period or something like that. We felt that the most relevant information would be first-time job ads, and that's about 1/2 of all job postings. And so the number of postings that you'll see in the report are less than what is typical, but we think more relevant. And so the report looks something like this, and again, you can get that at the link that I provided. So you can see it by employer in your local area, and you can see it by occupation and the number of postings. And this is available for each EDR and is available in each month. So it's very current, and it reflects the prior 30 days of activity. And again, that is new job postings only. The second product that we've rethought and revised is the projected employment demand. This is a deliverable that's produced for the Department of Labor. And it has kind of 3 main components to it. First, there's a 2-year projected demand, and that's statewide, both by industry and by occupation, so around 120 industries and 700 occupations. And that is produced every year. There is also a 10-year projected demand. So whereas the first product kind of focuses on business cycle demand, the second product focuses on what's the long-term demand, what's the structural demand, or the kind of the career orientation of demand. And we produce that both statewide, again, by those same industries and occupations, and we do that every 2 years. But in the alternate years, we also produce that 10-year demand for EDRs and for WIAs. So, for example, in the last fiscal year, we produced the 2019 to 2021 statewide. That's the 2-year, the cyclical demand. And we produced the 2018 through 2028 statewide, which is the long-term structural demand. Well, in our conversations with DCEO, particularly with Julio Rodriguez and Mike Baker and company, they felt, and rightly so, that what would be critical and for the local WIA community, WIOA community, is to provide a set of long-term projections that reflect the COVID impact. And so Darnell Cloud of my staff, who's the manager of the program, has been working on how to kind of rethink this long-term structural demand, those models that we use, but with a COVID impact. So a part of what he's working on is using kind of internal administrative data, both UI claims, which has the advantage of being very timely, as recent as week ending October 17th. One of the enhancements that we do for analytical purposes is we actually geocode those claims by the claimant residence, and so they're very local. In addition, as some of you know, the state of Illinois also produces a monthly UI wage record. It actually reports out monthly employment and earnings for the first 2 months of every quarter. And that's in contrast to the quarterly UI wage record, which has a much longer lag to it. So we use that product as well in the enhancement of our modeling on the COVID impacts. There's other external sources of information that we're using, sales tax revenue from the Department of Revenue, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a fairly extensive website on resources to use on modeling of local labor market impacts that we're accessing. And so we hope then to produce a COVID-19 set of statewide 2018 to 2028 employment forecasts probably by the end of December, maybe into the beginning of the new year, and then have all the EDRs and the WIAs done sometime in the summer. So just to stop there, if there are any questions on those two products before I kind of continue with the presentation on a demo of the portal. So if you could, perhaps, I don't know, Kirsten, if your practice is to just write questions into the chat and you want to read those out and I'll respond to them, or how would you like to handle this?
Yes, that's exactly how I would like to handle it. I do not see any questions right now. There are a couple comments, but I believe we can address those at the end for the Q&A. But I don't see any questions coming in so far, George.
Okay. I'm going to just stop sharing for a minute here and pull up then the demonstration if I could.
That looks great, George. We can see it.
Okay, great. So the new product that we've been working on, and as I mentioned, some of you may have seen parts of this, but I want to stress that we've had some new features of late that I'll show today. And if you all could just kind of keep in mind those initial set of questions that we received from our local partners. You know, again, which local labor markets have been hit the hardest by the layoffs, the economic impact, the composition of the unemployed. And as I go through this, just kind of playing those questions in the back of your mind, because that's very much what shaped the design of this portal. And the kind of the context of the portal is to develop an understanding of the pipeline for the unemployed. And so you have a beginning part of that pipeline and kind of an end part of that pipeline, and then a lot of activity that happens in between. So the beginning part of that pipeline is George files for unemployment. Okay, I've been laid off. So that's the very beginning. The second then step of that pipeline is George receiving his UI benefit. So you could move from layoff to the collection of UI benefits, being a recipient of unemployment benefits. And then the end point, let me just jump to the end. The end point, of course, then is the reemployment. And of particular kind of focus in the COVID world is whether George is returning to his same employer, or is George returning to a different employer in the same industry? Or third, is George finding employment in a completely different industry? Okay, so that's kind of the two endpoints. And then in the middle, we're tracking George's progress or movement through his UI experience. So a part of that is George receiving reemployment services, RESEA. And a part of that is George receiving either being enrolled or being enrolled and completing a local WIOA training program. And so that pipeline was actually a proposal that IDES and DCEO submitted to USDOL for a WDQI grant, and DCEO won that award. And so the two agencies have been working together in constructing that pipeline. And so, in fact, those of you who know Patty Schnorr, she's been working furiously of late in developing the local WIOA training program data to integrate into what you're going to see today. So the idea here is to articulate the UI experience in a set of visualizations that capture the movement through the pipeline, the UI pipeline. Okay? So this first screen is who's getting laid off and what does the volume of layoffs look like. Okay? Over on the right, you can see kind of the time series progression of those layoffs. They peaked in the beginning of April with over 200,000 layoffs. This is in a single week. These are not cumulative counts. These are a week in time count. So prior to COVID, we would typically have somewhere between 10 to 15,000 layoffs. 3 weeks into COVID, we had over 200,000 layoffs. And then you can see that Illinois had a couple different plateaus in the layoffs. So in May, for example, there was 3 weeks of around 75 to 80,000 per week. And then through June, and into July, you had another plateau at around 55,000. This is per week. And then in August, you had another step down to around 30 to 35,000. And then you see this increase here, and you might think, wow, it looks like the economy really deteriorated. But these initial claims following 9/19 are actually initial claims for extended benefits for the PEUC. So my point here is that the data are comprehensive. They're comprehensive of those who receive regular UI as well as those who receive the CARES Act, PEUC, as well as the extended benefits. And the idea then is to differentiate those different UI programs so that you can be viewing the most current information by program, by UI program. Okay, so let me just run through kind of quickly the fuller extent of this visualization. So we'll go the week before COVID. There's around 12,000 claims, layoffs, initial files, and not much happening around the counties, right? And so this distribution reflects the total number of initial claimants as a percentage of employed people in the counties, okay? So it's normalizing it to the local labor market, because remember, the concern is what's happening in the local labor market. So you need to know how deep is that cut in the local labor market. So you have to do it in the context of the local labor market, which is in the context of the number of employed persons in that local labor market, okay? Now let's go 1 week in. 1 week into COVID, now we're up to 128,000 layoffs. And here's the demographic breakdown. And let me just point out one other thing. Prior to COVID, claimants are typically around 2/3 male, 1/3 female, maybe 60-40, depending on the week. 1 week into COVID, look how it switched. There's a very distinctive gender impact of the COVID crisis. And you can see its impact on the local labor markets. Look up at the north, but also look down at the south, Clay County. It had less than 200 layoffs, but it represented over 3% of its employed persons. And you go the second week into COVID, and now you're up to 182. And notice this southern region darkening, and the border counties darkening. And now we're into the peak where you had over 200,000 layoffs in a single week. Notice what's happening down in the southern region. And if you want, you can go ahead and just select that whole region. Well, I didn't do that very well, but let me try it again. And display the demographic breakout for that region and the time series for that region, okay? There's also an industry view of this and a occupation within industry view of this, but I'd like to go ahead and just reserve those views for the next stage. But let's just progress to June. And I just want to show you one thing quickly. So this is June, week ending June 13. There are 56,000 layoffs. Not much happening with the exception of, boom, Livingston County. 500, almost 500 layoffs, representing over 3% of employed persons. So having this mapping capability allows the user to quickly identify the hotspots, the geographic hotspots. Okay, and you can click on that county, and here's the gender breakdown, here's the demographic breakdown, age, high school, race, ethnicity, and the disabled population, and look at the movement in Livingston County. You can see that it's going up and down and up and down. It's a very unstable, very tenuous labor market at that point. From the beginning of April, pretty much through the end of June. One other thing, you can look at the time series or the trends by all these demographic groups. So you can see prior to COVID, males are kind of the dominant, again, around 60%, sometimes higher, of all claimants, all those who are laid off. During the peak of COVID, you can see it was actually female claimants who were dominant, all the way through to probably the beginning of May. And then there's a more equitable. So you had that initial stage of COVID hit female workers much harder than male workers. Okay, so let me just move on a little bit here. I'm going to go back a little bit. And here is kind of phase 2 or step 2 in that UI pipeline. These are data that reflect individuals who are collecting UI benefits. So the first one was who's laid off. The second one is who's a certified claimant, who's actually collecting. And again, you can see that prior to COVID, we'll just move this right before COVID, a typical week, we would have around 120 to 130 individuals receiving UI benefits. And I should also say that these data are updated weekly. So for example, tomorrow, ETA will release its latest UI claims information for week ending, I think it's 10/24, maybe. On Friday morning, all this will be updated with all our claims information through week ending 10/24. So prior to COVID, a typical number of certified claimants is around 120 to 130. Not much happening geographically. And then as you march through the COVID period, now remember, in the state of Illinois, people certify for 2 weeks for the prior 2 weeks. So these individuals who are in week ending 3/28 are certifying for the week prior to, well, no, these are actually people who certified for that week, for 3/28. And you can see that it's already up to 380,000. So more than double, almost triple the typical weekly count. The peak in the certified claimants, as you can see, it peaks in the beginning of May at over 750,000 claimants. Over 750,000 individuals were collecting UI benefits in the beginning of May. And again, you can see there's a very kind of gradual decline from that May peak in June and July. And then in August, there's kind of an acceleration, but then a flattening again. And what happened was that probably for 3 months after the peak, for May, June, and July, we were probably declining around 2 to 3% per week. That was reflecting a very tepid kind of labor market. People were persisting on unemployment insurance. And then as you moved into kind of the September month, there is an acceleration off of regular UI, but that's because they were transitioning to the PEUC certification. So it wasn't that the labor market was improving, rather quite to the contrary, it was indicating a continuation of this very tepid kind of labor market behavior. It's just that they were transitioning to extended benefits, the PEUC. And so you can see in the beginning of February, here's the demographic breakdown. Notice the dominance of the female claimants collecting, and you can actually see that here as well. So you had a decline, a sharp decline in layoffs, but a persistence of individuals collecting UI. And there was a persistent differentiation of the male-female impact. Okay, it's a much slower movement towards a more equitable distribution than was the case with the initial claimants. You can also look at all of this, and again, you can see the certified claimants at the peak. Look at what's happening down in the southern region again, and in the Northeast region. You can go ahead and just take that Northeast region and highlight it. And of the 750,000, 550,000 are in that Northeast region, claimants. And again, you can see the gender breakdown there, and you can see it reflected over here in the time series as well. But I think one of the questions is, well, what's the industry composition of those claimants? And so we're able to look at how the industry composition of claimants change over time, but as well, what is the geographic distribution of those industries, of the claimants in those industries. So we can go to pre-COVID, and you can see, it's not going to surprise anyone on this call, construction had the highest number of claimants. It was over almost 25%, followed by temp help and manufacturing, and then the professional services and retail, and then you can see it all there. But watch what happens over time. 1 week into COVID, look what pops to the top. In the first week, it's the restaurants. Construction still at the top and temp help, and then you have manufacturing at the third. But in 1 week, construction went from almost 25% of all claims to only around 17%, 16%. Go a second weekend. Now all of a sudden, healthcare is at the top, near the top three, and self-employed. And so as you move through this timeline, you can see how the industry composition of claimants changes. And then if you want, you can go ahead and you can click on an industry and it'll show you that distribution. So notice that for manufacturing, you have this clustering again along the border and in the southern regions. What that means is that the percentage of that manufacturing claimants as a percentage of all claimants is much higher in these border areas and in the southern region. In Hamilton County, it was almost half of all claimants were in manufacturing. So if you're developing an reemployment strategy, knowing the industry composition of your claimant population in your local area is really critical. And let me just point out one other piece of information that we provide. So I'll go to Wayne County. You'll notice that the weekly benefit amount for manufacturing claimants is like almost $9,000. So that's $9,000 in that week was going into Wayne County just for manufacturing. Now, if we go to the, I think we're on 4.4. We'll go back to Wayne County. In the beginning of the COVID, the weekly benefit amount went from $9,000 to $137,000 each week. That's what's pouring into Wayne County in UI benefit. But you'll notice that down at the bottom of that, there's a net payment of almost $300,000. That includes the federal FPUC payment, the extra $600. So we've been able to identify not just what is the state UI benefit payment, but also the federal UI benefit payment. So in that week, in April 4th, for the manufacturing, for claimants from the manufacturing industries in Wayne County, they're receiving almost $300,000 just in that week. That's how you begin to understand the economic impact. And in fact, we've compared, because we're able to link this data to our employment and earnings data, we know what those people made in 2019. And so we're able to compare the 2019 wages to the 2020 UI benefits and calculate a wage replacement. Okay? I just want to quickly go through, I have about 10 minutes, and quickly want to go through a couple other views here. So this is retail trade. This is the demographic breakdown by age of claimants in retail trade. So about 8% of them were less than 25 years old, and 23% of them were between 25 and 34. So as you move along the COVID timeline, you're able to notice the changes in the age structure. 1 week in, it went from 8% to 13%. 2 weeks in, from 13% to 17%. 3 weeks in, almost 20%. So you'll notice then that the age composition of claimants in retail trade dramatically changed at the beginning of COVID. And you can follow this through all the weeks. One more demographic breakdown I want to show you is in healthcare. And so pre-COVID, and let's look at education. Okay. Prior to COVID, about almost half of the claimants in healthcare only had a high school diploma or the equivalents. And 17% had an associate's degree, 16 bachelor's, 10% master's. Watch what happens. First week of COVID, look what happened to associates, almost 25%. There wasn't much of a change with bachelor's and master's, and as you follow this through the weeks, this persists. And so the COVID hit in healthcare were those with associate's degrees. Okay, I just want you to kind of hold that in your head while we go to this next visualization, which is the occupation. And we're going to go ahead. So this is the occupational composition within industry. This is within healthcare across geography and time. So prior to COVID, about 21% of individuals, claimants from the healthcare industry were healthcare technicians or technologists. And a slightly greater percentage were in health services. And you'll see that, I don't know, slightly less than maybe 40% of counties, the healthcare technologist was the top occupation for healthcare claimants. Look what happens when you start moving through COVID. Bam. All of a sudden, the technologists now are almost 35% to 34%. And look what happens to the county breakdown. That becomes the top occupation now in probably 80% of counties. And you go a little bit farther. And now you go to the third week in COVID, all but 5 counties or 6 counties, the technologists were the top occupation for claimants. And putting that together with the associates information, these are the people, they're not involved in necessarily diagnosing or treatment of patients. These are the folks who are the radiologists, who are the support staff, technologists in healthcare. The final slide that I wanted to show you, I've got to go back here a few if I could. And this is what was added just yesterday. So this is the first visualization that you saw for the, yeah, this is claimants. Let me, that's not coming up now. Okay. Oh, there it is. Not quite sure what was the. So we've actually developed a set of visualizations that track UI claimants over time. So at the very beginning of a week, 100% of claimants are collecting. What happens over time? And this gets at the issue of exhaustion. What's the proximity to exhaustion of UI claimants? And you can view it by geography. And so typically what you find is that by the 4th week, somewhere between 70%, maybe 2/3 of claimants persist on UI. And that's what you find in this January week. Let me just adjust this back here. I was looking at it before. And so you can see, you know, the first weekend, just about all the counties have claimants. Those brown counties are where the data have to be suppressed because the counts are too small, so we have suppression here. And you can see, again, the drop between the 4th and the 5th week, which is fairly typical. And again, you can see the drop over here because we have a waiting week. It's actually in the 28th week where you see that drop. So you have 26 weeks of UI and then a waiting week. So that takes you to the 27th week. And so this shows you how many are persisting past the 26th week. And you can see the progression across weeks, you know, by county. So that's the 2nd week, the 3rd week. You'll see it lightening up the 4th week. And so this helps you to see kind of which counties are persisting at high levels, higher levels than other counties for the percentage of claimants that are collecting past the 4th week and into the 5th week, okay? So that's the general outline. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like in the first week for those who collected in that first week of COVID. A couple things to notice. Now we're in the COVID period. Look how elevated these levels are. Remember, by the 5th week, only 67% of claimants were still collecting UI after the 4th week. In the COVID period, it's 85%, 84%. Second, you'll notice that the drop-off is between week 26 and 27, not 27 and 28. And that's because the federal legislation, the CARES Act, suspended the waiting week. So my point here is not that you know that detail, but that you know that now we're able to track UI claimant behavior according to the changes in federal guidelines. And the second thing is, let's kind of look at what happens to the counting distribution of claimants over time. Remember, this is 4 weeks in. They're still all dark. 5 weeks in, you're starting to get a little bit of lightening in some counties. But 6 weeks in, we're still largely between 80 to 100% of all claimants are still collecting UI. That is in contrast to prior to COVID. Okay? Just a final couple quick visualizations. This has been developed and implemented in multiple states. So this is what Indiana looks like in that demographic breakdown. But what I want to show you is the industry. Okay. Mining and extraction is less than 1% of claimants in both states. But let's just select it. And you can see that in the southeast portion of Illinois, that is considered a real hotspot for mining and extraction. And look what happens. Let's go to pre-COVID in Indiana. And this persists through COVID. So you can see that there's a need for a shared interstate economic development policy as it relates to that industry, both pre-COVID and during COVID. This is a long-term structural issue. It would be easy to overlook because it's less than, 1-2% of all claimants. But once you're able to focus on the industry and then look at it over time, all of a sudden what comes out, what gets illuminated is the critical nature of that to this whole region. So I'll end there. Grabbed a couple extra minutes than I should have, so I apologize for that. But I'll end there. And Kirsten, I'm glad to take any questions at this point.
Sounds great. So we do have a couple questions that have come through. We have some comments that I wanted to note. So Sherry says that the lack of childcare and remote learning is causing a number of people to reduce hours or quit employment. That's just her comment to the discussion. We had a comment about what a great tool this is. So that's some positive feedback. And another comment, women taking brunt of the stay-at-home work and for childcare reasons. So just another comment to the discussion. And then we did have some questions. Those questions include, does this break out the veteran population or just UCX?
No, the individuals, in fact, do designate whether they are a veteran, and so that does appear here in the data. If I could just comment quickly on those first couple of observations. This survival visualization, the next phase of it will actually be do it by demographic, and so you'll be able to compare the persistence of female claimants and male claimants, for example, over time. And I think that will get at some of the barriers to the reemployment of women, at least as it appears in terms of the persistence.
Okay, great, thank you, George. And then we have a couple more coming through. Sherry says, how are those people accounted that gave up getting UI as they could not get through on the phone? Their UI account has had a glitch and or lack of internet and were unable to go into IDES.
So the thing to keep in mind is, again, this construct of a pipeline. The individual first applies, in which case they're considered a UI claimant. So if they're able to apply and there's a glitch of some sort on their payment, then they're counted in layoffs. And then once their glitch is resolved, they're put back into the certified claimant pool and we pick them up. And so that's true even if they have a glitch in filing. At the point that it gets resolved, then they are put back into the filing pool.
Okay, thank you for answering that, George. And then someone would like to know how they would access this information and if you can share out the link.
So this is developed in partnership with the Coleridge Initiative and the Administrative Data Research Facility. They have recently acquired an enterprise version of Tableau to share it out, and so the administration is currently deciding how to best procure that service. And so our expectation is that a decision will be coming very soon to get this out to the local workforce boards. And in fact, getting their feedback for future enhancements.
Okay, thank you, George. And then Patricia said, hello, as George stated, DCEO was notified that it received a 1 million, I believe, WDQI award in July 2019. Workforce Data Quality Initiative part of that funding is dedicated to the ADRF and blending WIOA Title I adult, dislocated worker, and youth data. In June of 2020, the DCEO was awarded an additional 110,000 WDQI funding to continue to support the work you are looking at today. And this is from Patty Schooner. She has put a link for this information on the WDQI, and she has sent that to us as the panelists, and I will push that out to all of you as attendees right now. Her message, so that way I just put it in the chat, so that way you can access that funding information if you are interested in that. I don't see any other questions coming through, but we will give everyone a brief second. If they have any last minute questions, go ahead and feel free to type those in the chat or the or the Q&A question and answer box. And then a couple of housekeeping things as we're wrapping up, and then I'll let you finish us out, George. I wanted to note that this webinar is recorded. If you would like to reference this information again or share it out to coworkers, this webinar will be put up on the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support's website, and I have put that link in the chat at the very beginning. You will also receive that same link in a follow-up email tomorrow. I also, this webinar recording and slides are also available on Illinois WorkNet's website. If you are more familiar with that website, feel free to access the materials there. And then I did go ahead and put the follow-up survey in the chat. If you have a brief second following this webinar, if you would like to go ahead and take it now while this webinar is fresh in your mind, we would appreciate it, but you will receive that same follow-up survey link in the follow-up email tomorrow morning as well. And with that, I don't see any other questions coming through or comments. I wanted to thank you, George, for presenting today. Thank you to all of our attendees. And then, George, did you have any final thoughts for our webinar as we're wrapping up?
Just to circle back actually to my first slide, which was the commitment to develop strategic information products. The motivation for that actually came from our local partners and our agency partners, and then working together on good solutions to that. So I want to be clear on the importance of those relationships and those communication flows to the ongoing effort that we have to be both timely and relevant with our products. So I thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you, George, and thank you everyone for attending today. And we do have a double feature webinar today. If you would like to join us at 12 o'clock today, we have our webinar, Illinois Innovations to Boost Equitable Digital Skill. Oh, oops, excuse me, I'm saying the wrong webinar. I apologize. Our webinar today at 12 o'clock is the Illinois WorkNet Online Tools, Employment 101 at 12 o'clock, and you can still register on our website if you would like to attend that. It's a double feature today. And then we have 2 webinars, a double feature again next Wednesday if you would like to join us for those. Those are the Illinois Innovations to Boost Equitable Digital Skills Access and Acquisition, and that this is part 2 of a webinar that we did, part 1 in September. So again, that one to boost equitable digital skills in the workplace is next Wednesday, November 4th at 10 a.m. And we also have a double feature that day with navigating the Illinois WorkNet portal at 1 o'clock that day, I believe. So please check those out. We are sending the marketing out for that every Monday in our WIOA Wednesday webinar newsletter marketing that we send out each Monday. So please feel free to check out those webinars as well. And hopefully we will see some of you at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your Wednesday.